want to read you a passage that's I've never ever taught from before in all my decades of ministry, and yet it's a passage that's kind of precious to me in this sense. This was a story my mama read to me from Hurlburt Stories of the Bible, which was like, back in my generation, a sort of the Bible stories put into a way that little kids could understand, all combined in a book called Hurlburt Stories of the Bible. I can remember many times being under 5 years old. I don't remember a lot, but I remember my mama reading to me stories from the Bible, and I remember this one. In fact, well, let me read it. Why I remember this one is we're going to see in a moment. Everyone's forsaking God. I remember thinking, after all he did for them, they're going to forsake him? Now, again, my thinking wasn't quite this level. I was under 5. I remember asking my mom, why did all these people abandon God? Isn't anyone standing up for God? Says, well, Moses was. So I remember at that time, as a little kid, thinking, I'll do that. Well, I'm not sure I have my whole life. And certainly when I got over 5 and got into school, I didn't think at all about going to the ministry. But I think God used this to call me back again. Say, hey, remember that commitment you made at, 3 or 4 years old? God, I'll do that. If culture gets to a place where no one's going to church anymore, where no one wants to stand for even people that you've blessed, if they've taken their blessings and thrown them back in your face, God, I'll stand up for you. And I think one of the reasons God gave me decades of ministry is because of this story right here from Exodus chapter 32. So here we go. You ready? Just 6 verses. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, when they heard that Dr. Jim wasn't preaching that weekend, and Pastor Dan was out of town, and who knows when he's going to get back, we heard he's going to get, he said, they gathered around Aaron and said, come make us a god, or more specifically, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, as for this guy, Pastor Dan, Dr. J, as for these guys, we don't know what's become of them. This fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. Aaron answered them, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing. When I was a little kid, guys didn't wear earrings. They do again. Take off their earrings, he said, and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. That's what's made this nation great. Not the Judeo-Christian heritage. Not our forefathers. What made this Christian great? What made this nation great? They just flat out lie. This is what did it for you, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. So when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, well, tomorrow we're going to worship the Lord. And by the way, whenever you see the word Lord in all capital letters in your Old Testament, it is translated in the precious covenant name of God, Yahweh or Jehovah. So it's almost like Aaron is saying, all right, well, we're going to combine it all, so it's okay, you can be all that, and we'll kind of bring God into this. How many of you guys know, and again, this isn't even my message yet, that when you accept Jesus, he's not like simply adding something to your life, and you can keep doing everything else the same. That's what Aaron's doing here. Anyway, I got to finish the text. When I read through the Bible, I start preaching before I even get to what I want to preach about. Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. Last verse for today. So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. This is like a holiday weekend, like Labor Day weekend for them now. It's like a Christmas holiday. It was great. And look what they did. Afterward, they sat down, just like we do today, to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. King James says, got up to play. Some of the translations say, and began to party like it was 1999 or something like that. Now, there's an image, which I just want to quote. There's an image that people often have if they've been around church very much, that the New Testament presents us with a God of mercy, and the Old Testament presents us with a God of judgment, and a God who's kind of legalistic. By the way, that never goes over good with Jews. If you want to present that's really an oversimplification. Because Bible, even when God gets, I'm going to get away from my message here. So let me just quickly say this. I don't think I'm going to preach on it yet, but the rest of this chapter is phenomenal. Because when Moses is up there with the mountain and this starts to happen, God says to Moses, hey, Moses, your people. You ever notice how parents, if you're mad at your kids, I'll say to Margaret, your kids are acting up. God pulls that on Moses. Exodus chapter 32, the rest is one of the most powerful passages in the Bible because Moses enters into high-level intercessory prayer. It's because God says, I've had it with your people, man. So Moses also gets right back in God's face and says, wait a minute. I'm just kind of, you guys okay? He says, wait a minute. This wasn't my idea. You called me to go say, let my people. Well, you're the one that brought all this about. So these aren't just my people. These are your people. And what's going to happen to your namesake about it? And so, and you know what? By the way, God knew all this. It's not that God was so angry. God wanted to bring this out of Moses. Moses goes into high-level intercessory prayer on behalf of a really wicked, stiff-necked people. He didn't call up the phones and start going on the prayer line and say, you know what people are doing? We need to pray for them because they're gossip. High-level prayer. So not so quick. I'm going to skip that verse, by the way, in the back, guys. So not so quick, because sometimes the Old Testament stories, we need to get into some of these Old Testament stories. God in the Old Testament is not simply a God of judgment. In fact, even God, I'm going to use it. Even the wrath of God. Someone look at me right now. Even God's wrath is different than human anger. Our anger tends to be destructive because we're mad, we want to hurt someone, we want to break something. Our anger tends to be destructive. God's anger is always, I repeat, always constructive. God only allows judgment to come typically after numerous times of warning us. And if his warnings don't work, he will sometimes allow judgment to come. And even then, I hope at least that will bring them to their senses. Which brings up this verse I was going to skip a moment ago. Lamentations, which I preached from last time. Jeremiah the prophet, who's lamenting the fall and judgment of God upon Jerusalem. He says this, I love this. For no one is cast off by the Lord forever. Though he bring or allow grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love. Then I love this phrase. For he does not willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone. Any parent who's a decent parent has to know this. Even though, there's the old joke, your dad tells you, this is going to hurt me more than hurt you, son. You always think, yeah. But when you get to be a parent, when you get to grow up and be a parent, you realize that's absolutely true. No parent likes to spank a kid. Is that even allowed anymore? Much less send a kid to his or her room. You'd much rather have the kid. God does not willingly allow this stuff to come in. He does it with this tear in his eye saying, I wish you would have listened to me. I wish you hadn't gone down that path. And now you're going to have to suffer some of the consequences of the choices you made. And I'm so sorry you're going to have to do that. But I'm hoping at least that might cause you to wake up. Some of y'all know exactly what it's like for yourself or someone you dearly love who really wasn't willing to even authentically get help with their addiction until the 10th, 11th, 12th, or 13th bottom of their life hit. Anyone breathing out there right now? So what's taking place right now is that God is just, the Old Testament's really a story of a faithful God who stays faithful in the midst of an unfaithful people. It's a story of God who finds ways to be good to folk who are always finding ways to be bad. It's about a God who loves folk that, if the truth be told, ain't really worth all that loving. It's the story of a God who goes exceedingly abundantly above anything they ask or deserve. It's a story of a people who run to God when they need something, but run from God whenever he asks them for something. It's a story of God. It's a story of a people who want God to do everything when they're not willing to do anything in return. And the reason we ought to hang out once in a while in little stories like this in the Old Testament is because they ought to start sounding a little bit familiar, because it's not just antiquity, it's now. It's not just them, it's us. It's not just his story, it often is our story, and we can learn from it so much. And we will find that even when God is completely justified to act with the hand of wrath, his hand of wrath is more often than not stayed by his own heart of mercy. Are you there yet? I haven't got to the fun part yet, but I hope I'm teaching you some Bible right now. I'm going to say that again. You will find that even in the Old Testament, that God's hand of wrath is often stopped or modified or changed by his heart of mercy. For he never willingly, it's never his first choice to have his family, his people, his loved ones go through some of the stuff they're having to go through. I am going to skip that next passage, by the way, for those guys in the back right now. Probably don't need to do that, sorry. In fact, I will get corrected by staff after the sermon. Dr. Jim, you're old. Don't do that when you're up there. By the time we get to this passage that I just read to you, there ought to be some things that you're familiar with. I'm old enough to remember the old movie, The 10 Commandments, but most of y'all aren't. There was a little bit more. Man, how old is this movie now? 20 years or so? I think the Prince of Egypt, the animated feature about the life of Moses. But you remember, everyone knows about Joseph, who was sold into slavery, ends up in Egypt. Bottom line, he ends up ruling Egypt. He saved the most powerful nation on the planet, and he's a hero. And the people are there. His own family comes because at home there's a drought going on. You go, well, what happened? How'd they end up slaves? Ooh, listen to this. There's that one Bible verse. Did I put it in my notes? I think I did. There's a very scary Bible verse because it just says it like the Bible summarizes what happens with one verse. Because, man, Joseph was a hero. The people of God were there. They're being taken care of until this happened. It says in Exodus 1:8, eventually, a new mayor is elected in West Covina. By the way, I'm just making that up. I don't even know who is mayor right now in West Covina. A new governor of California arises. A new president in the White House and senators serving out. Eventually, a new Pharaoh, a new king came to power who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. The actual Hebrew just says, a Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph. Another version says the same verse. Then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. And I don't want to go off on all this right now, but I can see a lot of that taking place in the United States right now. In our nation, in our universities, in Hollywood, in the media, there is an entire generation right now that doesn't know, doesn't care about the positive contributions the Judeo-Christian heritage has made in this great nation. They don't know, they don't care. Sometimes you have a lot of the current social warriors who just don't know. Through their education, I'd probably believe the same thing they believe. But what they've been taught is not a complete picture. I'm not saying everything they're saying is not. A lot of what they say is true. But you want to go, yeah, but that's not the whole story. Did you know and that's all I'm going to say for right now. Maybe I'll get off on it later. But do you know it's easy to prove by going back to the original documents and not having to go to Yale and have Yale translate what took place, or Mount SAC or UCLA or SC or whatever. It's easy to show that had it not been for the Christian church, slavery would have never been abolished. And yet today you would think all Christians were white slave owners. If it wasn't for Christians, the American Indians would have been treated way, 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 way worse. But if you look at the movies in Hollywood and go to school, you'll think Christians are the one who abused the Indians. And I just want to go, wait. A Pharaoh arises who knows not Joseph. And all of a sudden, boom, once it was a favorable thing and now you're out of favor. Are you still breathing out there? So, you know what happens. God raises up Moses, because after 400 years of this, being slaves, the people finally cry out to God. So God raises up Moses, and Moses just has one sermon. Let my people go. I'm taking too long in this, so let me just jettison the story. Pharaoh lets them go. Eventually, after all the plagues, Moses leads them out out of the land, and God's doing all kinds of incredible stuff. Remember all the plagues? He parts the Red Sea, all of that. And eventually, just before we get to this story, God, in essence, tells the people, now I did not bring you out of bondage and slavery and addiction and a life going nowhere for nothing. I have a purpose for you. And then he says, and because I have a purpose for you, I have a few expectations. Uh-oh. He starts telling them a little bit about what kind of God he is and how he expects them to live. In fact, he starts to put down the law. And if you read Exodus chapter 24, it's almost kind of funny. The people are like, they are so glad to be set free that they're totally, at that point, they're like, cool. Because Moses is up there going, boom, boom, boom. Here's what God expects. Boom. No problems, man. You ever notice that when you first got delivered from drugs and you were supposed to spend time in prison and maybe you should even be dead because a lot of your buddies are dead, that when you first become, okay, yeah, man, God, whatever you want, man. Well, I'll go be a missionary in some bizarre country someplace. I'm not sure there are bizarre countries, but, I think you know what I'm trying to communicate. And then a little while later, you're like, maybe not. Because by the time we get to this chapter, I mean, wow. Because Moses has gone up to the mountain, and the people are nervous. Because it's almost like this. That's why I don't always like to go to church. Because sometimes when the pastor although this church, I think we're a relatively positive church. Even when we're talking about trying to live our lives right, I think we're not just sitting there, the old traditional, finger pointing, don't do this and don't do that. But there is at times a little bit where you don't want to go because I'm kind of messed up right now. I don't want to go hear about how I should change. People are like, every time Moses spends time with God and he comes down, he has more rules for us. He comes down with all this stuff, more stuff God doesn't want us to do and God does want us to do. And it's just starting to mess with it. Even, at least when I was a slave in Egypt, I pretty much got to live my own personal life, how I wanted to live my own personal life. And so it's amazing. So what do? When he's gone? I like the way the Passion Translation translated one of these verses that I read to you today. Actually, this is Acts 7:41. It says, so they made a god. So they made a god. I've said before that the Bible says we were made in the image of God, and ever since we've been making God in our image. Why in the world? This is what I thought when I was a little kid and my mama read me this story. It just blew my mind. Why in the world would these people who have been in slavery, God saves them, he does all these incredible miracles to get them out. The Egyptian army goes after him even after the Pharaoh changes his mind once again. He parts the Red Sea. So why would they do all this? Why would you trade a God who brought you out of Egypt, who beat Pharaoh, who parted the Red Sea, for a God you made? But then I think about it, I think people do that all the time. Why would you do that? Just a couple thoughts for you. One of the reasons is that we want a God, and Christians do today, not just the world, Christians today in the church, we often want a God who's going to express our ideals and our dreams. A God who makes no uncomfortable demands, and a God who will stay out of our business and pretty much let us do what we want to do. For after all, nobody likes being told what to do. Yeah, that God delivered us, but what's the catch? What does he want from us now? You see, it's something interesting. I'll just touch on this. And by the way, I'm just having all these thoughts right now. And I used to get all this worked out on a Saturday night gathering, and we don't have one right now. So I get to work it all out with you. The good news is you get a little more information. The bad news is I'm not quite ready for prime time. Hopefully by 11 o'clock, I'll be ready for prime time. But do you realize that the Bible understands that even the law kind of has a negative connotation with us? What do we need? So Paul, especially in the New Testament, keeps trying to tell us what's good about the law. Because no one likes to be told what to do. Because that's us. By the way, that's the essence of a sinful nature. We don't like being told what to do. You don't know me. Don't tell me what to do. But Paul says, but if it weren't for the law, we wouldn't know how messed up we are. If it weren't for the law, I wouldn't know I'm drowning. If it weren't for the law, I wouldn't know I'm dying. And God gave us the law to let us know that we need help. So when he offers us help, we would receive the help. Even Jesus would often say, the well don't have any need of a doctor, because the religious leaders, who, by the way, needed more help than anybody else, the religious leaders kept criticizing him for hanging around sinners, prostitutes and tax collectors. And he would say to them, well, well people don't need to go to a doctor. Sick people do. And then he'd look at him. I bet his look was kind of like, baby, you need to go to a doctor too. Before you point your finger at that hooker, maybe you need to go to the doctor because you saw her last night. Are you breathing out there today? A God who listen, people to this day, we like a God we can control. Whenever anyone says to me, no, I'm not really in that churchy stuff, I'm just spiritual, I know for sure I have someone who's created a God in their own image. I can never love a God that sends anyone to hell. Well, especially open that. I get it. I understand that concern. But ultimately, you don't want a God that's going to tell you anything you don't want to hear about any issue. You want a God that you can control, and that's exactly what's going on here. A God that they can control. What I was going to say a moment ago about the law, too, is that the law just lets us know that I've illustrated it like this before. If you have the most beautiful grass in your neighborhood, and you want your grass to start getting messed up, put a sign in your front yard that says, "Don't step on the grass." For all this time, I bet no one stepped on your grass. People didn't think about stepping on your grass. No one wants to step on your grass. But even if I walked past your house and I'm a preacher, I love Jesus, and if I saw a sign in your yard saying, "Don't step on the grass," even I'd want to be like, who the heck do you think you are? I'll step on your stupid grass if I want to step on your stupid grass. What did that sign just do? Look at me. That sign just revealed something in me that I may not have known was even there. Anyone breathing? We want a God who we can control. We want a God who's going to let us play. I think it's fascinating that when they had the party, it says just like we do today in America, they ate, they drank, and they partied. It's exactly what they did. They ate, they drank, and they partied. I mean, they got high, they got drunk, whatever they wanted to do, they ate, they drank, and they partied. Now, is there anything wrong with eating, drinking, and the right kind of party? Absolutely not. But I think you know what I'm talking about. And a lot of us prefer an eat, drink, and party God to a God who thinks he can tell us how to live our lives in the best possible way. Does anyone here still believe? Let me just say this too. I'm so stupid. I still believe that when God gives me principles, it's not to bind me and restrict me. It's to give me the best possible life in every way. He knows how to live my life with the maximum joy. Therefore, when he gets into my business, in areas I think are my own business, like how I want to express myself sexually, or who I think I am, or what I'm going to do with my money, because I think I said to you last time I spoke, even most Christians, church gets, even back in the heyday, if you have a revival breaking out, if you want to shut down the spit, scream, and shout, start talking about God, what God says about the best way to have your best sex life and the best way to have your best financial life. It gets quiet. Because we're like, don't you tell me what I can do with my body, and don't tell me what I can do with my money. And yet I still believe God wants us to have, I better not say that. I'll say it. God wants to have the best sex life and the best financial life. So I'll leave it at that. They wanted a God they could control. They wanted a God that would allow them to play. They wanted a God who was culturally acceptable to everybody. Where you could be part of this thing and no one would think, why did they want to make it out of gold? Because they'd just been in Egypt. That's why. And in Egypt was the most powerful nation on the planet. And you didn't make your little gods out of wood or ivory. No. You made the best out of gold. And they thought, all right, man. But add to that the fact that they had been slaves for 400 years and didn't have any gold until fairly recently. Since I'm running out of time, let me skip and say this. Where did they get their gold from? Anyone remember? They were slaves. Where'd they get their gold? They got their gold because God told them to get it. After Pharaoh finally said, you can let him go, God says, and by the way, tell all the people of Israel who are slaves to just go ask their owners. Go ask the boss who owns the company. Say, oh, by the way, we're going to be leaving, and would it be okay if I take some of your jewelry? And if I take some of your stuff? And you know what God did? God laid it on their heart that whatever they asked, they got. So can you imagine people? You'd been a slave. All of a sudden you say, hey, can I have those gold in? Yeah, sure, take them. They probably don't know why they're saying yes. Why am I saying yes to this? I don't know. And the Bible literally says that when they left Egypt after 400 years of slavery, they plundered Egypt in that sense. They took all kinds of stuff. You know where that stuff had come from? God. Ooh, I'm out of time now, but look at me. I think it's sad when God's people take his blessing and turn it into a god. That gold was God's blessing to them, and they turned it into a god. I'm not getting your connection here, Pastor. You wouldn't even have that house were it not for God working in your life. And now you're too busy to attend gatherings, to help maybe volunteer a little bit at church. You're too busy for this and for that because of something you wouldn't even have were it not for God anyway. Just go, ooh. Okay, that way then. That is ultimate irony. And before I'm done, I just want to say this, because I'm not getting any younger. Next year I'll be 70. I can't. Oh yeah, thank you. And the older I get, the more I've come to understand that I don't know what the heck I'm doing. You talk to any older person here, kids. At my age, some of you that are 50 are kids. You talk to anyone who's older, and you'll find out we wouldn't make a good God ourselves. When I was younger, maybe I thought I knew how to control my life. And even as a preacher, I think I kind of did. That's why even as a preacher, certain parts of my life, God, so I'll handle this. You never say that. But you think that, though. You're even careful how you think it, because you think, well, God can understand my thoughts, so you have to think in code so God doesn't know what you're thinking. But as I've aged, I've come to the conclusion, I don't know what. And can I just tell you before I'm done, that your vision is too small to be God. Your understanding is too limited to be God. Your hands are too weak to be God. Your dreams are too selfish to be God. Your powers are too finite to be God. And your very being is too incomplete to be God. I find myself a lot in life now thankful for a lot of the technology. And so when I go places, even if I know exactly how to get there, I will go on an app that's called Waze. You know what I'm talking about? There are other ones. There's Google Maps. There's a lot. But I'll go on Waze. And I go on Waze because I never know, even though I know I grew up in this area, I know this is the quickest way from A to B. But what I may not know is that there's an accident. And therefore, I have to, why is Waze taking me this way? Better yet, for all you law enforcement, is sometimes let me know where the cops are. So, I think I'll let off the gas here. Sometimes, and the reason I bring all this up, and this is cutesy, this is a cutesy way to end, but I bet you remember this. One time I really felt the Lord say to me, he said, because I was doing exactly what Waze said. I was trusting Waze. And occasionally it messes up. It does. I'm sorry. It's not perfect. Sometimes I said, I knew I shouldn't have gone this way. They were wrong. But more often than not, it's right. There was something there. There was something there I couldn't see. So I let Waze. And then I think last time I preached, I told you the first verse I ever memorized was Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And don't lean upon your own understanding. In all your in all your ways, acknowledge him, and he'll be your GPS. He'll direct. And one time the Holy Spirit spoke to me very clearly. It was a few months ago. He said, I almost thought he said, again, God's not mean, but sometimes God can be kind of blunt with you. He says, man, you trust ways more than my ways. And I was like, what? I was like, hey, I kind of do. I want to challenge you, church. In this day and age, when I don't care what you believe politically, where you are, these are wild, crazy days we're living in right now. And I want to challenge some of God's real people. Don't fall prey to what many, many Christians are falling prey to right now. The Bible says we're to renew our minds so that we're not conformed to the way the world thinks. We're to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. I want to challenge you, trust God, believe God. I'm still a preacher who believes at almost 70 years of age, I still believe God knows more about your life than you do. Because God can see things in your future just like Waze can see in my GPS directions. God can see it, and trust Him. Trust Him with all of your heart. Don't make poor substitutes just because it makes sense. Well, I hope this message came across positive because I only made it through about half of it. And I promise you the second half was a little more positive for all of you that like positive messages. But sometimes I like a doctor. I've always told all my doctors, I don't like it if doctors are going to, what's it called, flower code or something. I want to be straight with me. If I have something going on, don't try to, just tell me. And then if you want to give me all the other information, the good news, the bad news, great. But I want you to be, sometimes I like preachers who just say, look, here's what's going on, and here's the straight scoop. Don't make a God. Trust in His ways, and He will direct your paths, I promise.